I'm really happy to see this interest in Irish mythology, because it's indeed a very fascinating subject. It's a very fascinating topic. And so what the idea for this talk this evening is to not go so much into the details or extensive knowledge of the myth of Cú Chulaiin and his life, but rather to try to extract some of the key teachings, key takeaways that can help us today in our way of living and in our way of being. I'll start with I will start with a general introduction, what mythology, or I will put us into a context what mythology is about, so that from that perspective we can as well focus on some of the key elements of the myth of Cú Chulaiin and see what does it mean for us today. Okay, so what we can say that today we live in an age where newer generations are deeply moved by a deep desire for authenticity, and often we say or hear to want to express ourselves, and yet it is difficult to grasp what does it truly mean to live authentically, isn't it? Beyond personal aspirations, we are also faced with another challenge, which is a collective one. We all know that we are not only shaped by our individual experiences, but at the same time that we partake in the collective experiences that we share with others, like with our family, our close friends, society, and we can extend this to include as well the nation and humanity. Frequently what we experience is a certain conflict between our profound aspirations and collective models and values that don't seem to provide an answer to our deepest and most sincere questions and needs. Our individual and historical experience has also shown us that our consumerist and materialistic society can't provide really good answers to these human questions. Our modern society frequently defines the human being or human nature in a rather pessimistic way, pulling us down with models that define the human being through instinct, calling upon our fears and doubts, and at the same time proposing a culture of comfort that supposedly is going to lead to happiness. And yet, at the same time, we live in a society and in the world that is increasingly violent. And it is like a vacuum or a desert of meaning. But paradoxically, such context of living at the same time provides a fertile ground for learning and awakening something new and better. This we can learn from history, and it's not without a reason that Mircea Eliade, who was a renowned Romanian historian of religion, said that light does not come from light, but from darkness. And in these deserts of meaning is where the hero is born, in this cultural chaos. And the modern man, you and I, intellectually understands by now that authenticity and lasting happiness cannot be acquired by external possessions, titles, or positions. The question is, do we dare to live an ancient advice that the philosophical investigation and personal transformation is the key to rediscovering true human condition and lasting happiness? By now you're wondering, why am I mentioning something like this in a talk that is about Irish myth and its principal hero? But philosophy, as a love of wisdom, always sought to awaken an inner human being, capable of living authentically in harmony with one's own values and principles. But it also proposes that it is possible to live this not only individually, but collectively too. How? By rediscovering universal and timeless values that you can understand like images or models for our behavior that enable us to live altruistically and in harmony with each other and with the world. You can imagine these timeless ideals like points of unity. But for this ideal of living to become a reality, each one of us has a task to awaken a hero within ourselves. Hopefully this helps us comprehend the role of myth in our lives that is beyond merely cultural understanding. Because the purpose of this lecture is not simply about the story it tells, because many great storytellers in Ireland would do a much better job than I ever could. But what I'm hoping is that with this talk, together we can find some keys to action that encourage us to reflect, which would help us to know ourselves and transform through our action, which would lead to mastering ourselves a little bit more. Because myth in Celtic tradition was a part of a living ideal. So it wasn't simply a story, a good night or entertaining story, but it inspired in people a certain way of living and being. Like any myth in the world, it captured the deepest human experience and values that allowed people of the time to assert that which was the best in themselves. And in Ireland, our mythical roots run deep. Centuries and many changes didn't cut this cord between us and our predecessors. And I hope that we can understand a bit more today what was so important to them that was passed on to countless generations. What they proposed is that the human being needs to rediscover its inner potential of the self and give meaning to one's actions. And therefore, it suggests that we need to build a different culture, the one that takes into account our aptitude for harmony. But our education today, and especially the mental images that we have, that have been taught to us, seem to be a major obstacle. Because these are the mental images that suggest that the human being is fundamentally selfish, that we are only driven by survival of the fittest. But this is where a mythology plays a larger role, because in mythology, we find the different role models and measure of what does it mean to be human. Why? As to inspire us in today's living and being. So I will continue with the myth of Setanta and Cú Chulaiin to try to understand a little bit deeper what values, what motivations, what images they were transmitting through this myth to the people of the time, and still today. So the myth of Cú Chulaiin starts with the birth of a boy named Setanta. It was an extraordinary conception, like of all heroes of the world. And there are multiple versions of his birth, so I'll focus on one. Okay. And apologies if I'm not pronouncing the names of the characters well. It's indeed quite tricky to learn that. So his mother, Betsina, conceives a child with the chief of the immortal Tuatha Dé Danann, Lu. And Lu is, as an immortal, is a deity, and his name means that which is light and bright. In one version of the myth, it says that she, the mother of Cú Chulaiin, was impregnated by swallowing a little creature that in reality was Lu. Another version tells us that she disappears with 50 maidens from the court of Conchobar mac Nessa. After 3 years, a flock of birds settles on the field of Olwyn Macha, destroying the crops. And Concovar and his men chase off the birds, who lead the royal party to Brunaboyne. That night, they'll enter a splendid place with Lou and 50 maidens. And Concovar asks for Detsina. She does not come, but instead sends her son Setanta. And here, what we see is that through the birth of Setanta, that we learn that he is a part mortal and part immortal. So that he has a heaven, the sky, and earthly component to himself, which is a characteristics of all the heroes. What's worth mentioning here is that at this stage, Setanta is not yet Cú Chulaiin, because he has to earn his condition of a hero and acquire his name, his new name, Cú Chulaiin. So the myth tells, it continues, that at the age of 7, Setanta will travel 25 miles by foot to join a martial corps of young boys in Owen Makkah, having to learn to respect the rules before he can become a part of the corps. One day, he was left behind playing hurley when the royal household went to visit a wealthy smith, Chulainn. He was to catch up with them, and as the evening went on, all have forgotten that Setanta is expected. When Setanta reaches Chulainn's place, he has no choice but to face the guardian hound, a large and ferocious beast, protecting Chulainn's residence. Without hesitation, with his 2 weapons, hurley and a slitter, he slays the hound by piercing him with a slitter through its mouth. Seeing Chulainn devastated by the loss of his guardian hound, Setanta promises to raise another whelp to replace it. But until it is grown and strong, he himself will serve to guard Chulainn's lands. At that moment, he acquires a new name, which is Cú Chulaiin. He becomes Cú Chulaiin, or what it means is the Hound of Chulainn, indicating that Setanta passed the first test. Because every hero must face and overcome the tests, and Cú Chulaiin is no exception. So the first test is to learn to overcome ourselves and to find our true aspirations. This is what we can take away from the myth. And to help us understand this a little bit clearer, I'll use a teaching of a Hindu myth, Bhagavad Gita, which is about a hero called Arjuna. This hero has to face a battlefield of life that will lead him to wisdom. And this is not an external battle, but an inner battle that we all experience, which is between our higher being and animal self, which is a little bit egoistic, selfish, instinctive, mechanistic. And a hero is a human being who rediscovers one's authentic self and chooses to overcome his lower instinct by awakening his inner strength. It teaches us that each one of us, at the heart of our being, has an immense potential of our immortal soul that allows us to grow and become better. And similarly, what we see in Setanta, he must slay the hound, or the instinctive self, in order to express his authentic nature, which is Cú Chulaiin. What it means is that we need to apply our courage and through authenticity to overcome our weaknesses. How? By accepting and facing our tests without hesitation and with clarity of mind and heart. Without calculation to fight our weaknesses, so we can be and become noble and just, therefore authentic. And Setanta gives us the key on how to do this. Namely, by accepting the responsibility for ourselves and others. And that is our test. Because only when we accept responsibility for our actions and condition, we can grow as individuals and live in harmony with others. Live in harmony with life and laws of life, without surrendering and becoming the victims of life, but being able to live each minute fully, accepting that in each test of life lies an opportunity of learning and transformation. We can define the quest for the hero as the art of mastery over oneself by learning to adapt, follow the course of things. It is a conscious process of transformation that leads to profound happiness that cannot be reversed. And responsibility is a sentiment that comes from the heart, a profound feeling that we carry a duty towards others and nature and ourselves. This leads to a change in our inner attitude. Our inner attitude changes from me, myself, and I to a perspective and a need to do what is right and just for me and others. It is to do that which is necessary without expecting anything in return. Because all heroes enter in the adventure of life because of others, and because they recognize that there is something larger than themselves. It is not a selfish quest, and yet paradoxically, it is the quest that leads them to become who they truly are. To take responsibility as well is to open our mind and heart to a possibility that life is not only about myself. And in this way, I can discover new colors to life, to others, to nature, and to ourselves that we didn't see before. The second challenge that we will face is that this path of self-realization and personal transformation must be walked patiently, without losing direction and confidence. And this is portrayed quite well in the part of the myth in which Cú Chulaiin kills his own son, Conla. What happens is that Cú Chulaiin is asked by Scáthach to fight a war against Eve, who is the warrior queen that even Scáthach fears. Eve is potentially a double of Scáthach, who herself was a famous warrior, known to have instructed Cú Chulaiin and other heroes in the martial arts. Cú Chulaiin, of course, will come out of this fight victorious, and he places 3 demands on Eve. The first one is to stop the war with Scáthach, stay with him for 1 night, and bear him a son, to which Eve agrees. And his son Conla is born. Cú Chulaiin is not a present father, but he leaves quite precise instructions on how the boy should be educated and brought up. And the first one is he must step aside for no man, never to refuse a challenge to a single combat, never to tell his name to anyone except when he is overcome by another combatant. And further, he also leaves him a ring that the boy should wear when his hand was sufficiently big, and then be sent to look for his father. At the age of 7, the boy returns to find his father. When the Ulstermen see him, they will send first the 2 lesser champions to fight the boy, but neither of them is successful. So the responsibility falls on Cú Chulain's shoulders to fight the boy, who prove himself to be a worthy opponent. But in Cú Chulain's impatience and ignorance, unable to see the signs that this boy is his son, he will be victorious in this fight and he's going to kill the boy, which of course is going to be followed by a great sorrow. Now, this is a symbolical language, and we shouldn't take this literally, but it's a symbol that is a story that is trying to teach us something. And there is a deep truth that we need to face the same tests repeatedly till we have developed sufficient strengths or the inner transformation to overcome them. Now, this is hard for our modern mindset to accept because we live and breathe instant culture that is driven by immediacy of events and our own desires. Because everything seems to need to be fast, to happen fast, and we desire to get our results fast. Why? So we can go back to a quiet and comfortable life. And when things don't happen quickly enough, we become emotional, frustrated, impatient, and mostly anxious, losing our courage and determination. But all the myths of the world, including Celtic myths, and in this particular case, the Cú Chulain's, the myth about the Cú Chulainn, show us that we cannot defy the laws of life. Not even a hero can. But that we must learn to live in harmony with them. Once we accept this, that we need to go through the cycles of life in order to learn, we can engage in our inner battle with confidence. If I get emotional, I can't learn because I can't see clearly. And in this act of ignorance, Cú Chulainn kills his son. Because as long as he doesn't master his own passions and impulsiveness, he is unable to act with intelligence and therefore to find the right balance. And here what we recognize and what we can see is that in a different clothing, Cú Chulainn is faced with his own weaknesses that he needs to overcome. What it tells us is that our inner challenges will follow us everywhere, no matter where we go. Our challenges repeat themselves when we are unable to learn from them and overcome them. So what is necessary is to learn to take responsibility for those challenges and correct ourselves again and again, as many times as we have to, by applying our inner potential. In this way, our actions become meaningful and an opportunity to gain in self-knowledge, and above all, self-mastery, so we can act justly and with love. That is to say, our actions have a direction. And something that I haven't mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, and when we started to look into the myth, is the meaning of the name Setanta. One meaning is that it's the god of roads and roads itself, but also another meaning is the one who knows the path, or in a different way is the one who never loses direction. There is another key to understanding of this test. It is also that there is a necessity for us to learn to let go of the old forms and habits that are holding us back in our inner progression. And that might be another symbol of the killing of the son. Because Cú Chulainn needs to learn to let go of something that is a part of himself, perhaps of his boisterous and passionate nature. What it means for us, though, is to let go of our habitual and unconscious ways of thinking and feeling that weigh us down. Because the origin of our limitations lies in our narrowness of our feelings and mind. Therefore, the first step to accomplish is to summon our will, together with our courage, to fight our weaknesses. Now, the final test that Cú Chulaiin needs to face is his own death, which in different words as well, or the meaning behind it, is to learn to transform and become a builder of oneself. At the age of 27, Cú Chulaiin senses his death, that his death, the final hours are approaching. And yet, he chooses to engage in his final battle. Because, as he says to his wife, that he has never shirked a fight, and that fame outlives life. Suggesting that we need to learn to prioritize in our life what is truly essential and lasting, and learn to detach ourselves from illusions and appearances. So Cú Chulaiin will be brought down to his knees by a combination of wizardry, violation of Gesa, which are the it's like a vow or limitations that are placed on a hero, and revenge of the children of a warrior who Cú Chulaiin kills. The children will become, he's a warrior and a sorcerer that Cú Chulaiin killed. And the children will become skilled sorcerers under the instruction of Maeve. The sorcerers will create an illusion that Éowyn, Macha, and Ulster are in danger, which deeply concerns Cú Chulaiin. And while everyone around Cú Chulaiin knows that this is only a hallucination, for him it seems to be true. And under certain circumstances, he escapes protection of a family and friends and runs towards defending them. And in this journey, he gets wounded by 3 crones who are all blind in the left eye. What they do, they put him in the impossible position. The 3 crones offer him a meal with a dog meat, which means that he, in order to eat, he would violate Gesa, or taboo or prohibition, that the hero must obey, or otherwise it can cost him his life or his strength. But at the same time, if Cú Chulaiin refuses the hospitality of the 3 crones, he breaks another Gesa, another law, and therefore there is no escape. He must choose. And he'll take the meal, and once he eats the meat of the hound, it will take away the strength from his left arm and leg, making him vulnerable. But Cú Chulaiin will still remain a formidable force. When he reaches the battlefield, he scatters the army. But the sorcerers have prepared 3 spears in order to kill Cú Chulaiin. The first 2 spears wound him, but the 3rd spear wounds him lethally. And Cú Chulaiin, holding his huge wand together, drags himself for a drink and the chance to wash himself to a nearby lake. And what he does, he ties himself to the stone so that he may die standing up vertically. And this agony of Cú Chulaiin continues for 3 days. And the ravens hover over him until he dies. And with his last sigh, he splits the stone at his back. And at the moment of death, when he dies, the ravens land on the stone itself. And what the myth says to us is that although lifeless, Cú Chulaiin remains still standing. The name of the stone that you actually can visit it's about 4 miles south of Dundalk. It's called the Stone of the Big Man. And I'll try my best to really pronounce it. It's Clocar Farmore. What does it all mean? And what we can learn from it? Because beyond the most obvious symbolism, which is that we all have to face death in our life, there is another one, more subtle meaning that is quite important to us if we want to learn how to philosophize and learn to live an authentic life. Because every day we need to let go a bit of our illusions, of our appearances, or in other words, of our ignorance, so we can discern what's what. Because in reality, what to let go, it means to die to the old self every day a little bit. So in order to gain in wisdom, we need to learn to cultivate, to die to our old self and to our own ignorance every day a bit more. And this state of verticality we find in ourselves when we have a clarity of mind of what is really true, good and just, and we are able to live in harmony with it. Ancient Greeks would say it is to live in harmony with oneself that leads to great and lasting happiness, which is eudaimonia. And what the Celts and Irish mythology teaches is that to live an authentic life, we need to rediscover a hero within ourselves every day. That is to say, to rediscover Cú Chulaiin within ourselves every day. A little bit more. And what would help me to let go of my appearances? Well, developing our moral resilience of character, so that I'm not shaken by the adversities of life or afraid of my own vulnerability. Because my moral character, my moral strength, is like the belt that holds Cú Chulaiin vertical, tied to a stone, even in the moments of his death. So I can live a vertical life or authentic life that is guided by the highest aspects of who I am as a human being. And this really brings me to the end of the lecture and to perhaps the most essential key is that the path of our own self-transformation appears only when we start walking it. And what's important is that there is no need to wait, like Cú Chulaiin didn't, like Setanta didn't, because as long as we wait, everything will remain theoretical and possibly cause a lot of confusion. Any steps that we take towards discovering our deepest nature will help us to actualize our real strength of our potential. And any step that we make, it's unforgotten. The myth of Cú Chulaiin, like any other myth, calls upon our intuition and imagination, so we can imagine ourselves and the world not only new but also a little bit better. So I hope that this very short lecture has given some of the indicators how we can engage with mythology in a way that helps us to discover new role models for ourselves in our daily living, and perhaps to remind us of our own true self, if we choose to live it, to engage with it. So as I said, that it doesn't remain just a wonderful story, but in a way that it becomes like a tool with which we can progress as individuals and as human beings.